We've started the recording. All right, so thank you everyone. So welcome. Like I said, today we're talking mostly about how to submit this report. So let's discuss the organizational grant program in general, starting with the grant requirements. This is a year one grant reporting and invoicing webinar. So we are expecting that everyone on this call is a year one grantee, meaning your grant is started in 1920. If that's not the case, you may want to call back when the year two reporting webinar begins, which will be around 3 o'clock. So we do have all of these documents online on our website. So if you haven't done this already, you may want to visit our website, visit the Manage Your Grant Final Requirements page to see the sample report questions. You can also see this PowerPoint on that page. And there's a link to begin on the fluid review system on that page. So just a reminder, all of these forms are submitted through the fluid review system, not on our website or on PDF forms. So you did see some PDFs on our website. It's solely for reference so that you can see and begin to kind of answer questions maybe on a Word document prior to going into the fluid review system. So quickly regarding the year one grantees, you all were awarded for a grant that begins July 1st, 2019 and ends June 30, 2020. The fiscal year that you're reporting on is the fiscal year that begins July 1st, 2019 and ends June 30, this year, sorry, 2020. The full cycle ends 2021. So your task when we begin this is to submit that report for this first year. We do have some big changes that we've made, mostly in response to the public health crisis. We know many of you have had to change your schedules, change your programming. Maybe some of you are creating digital content right now to have online while we're in this safer at home situation. So know that we did update our forms to kind of respond to the needs, to be as flexible as possible to you all as we can. So the summary of the main changes right now to the report are on the screen. Mostly these revolve around the report narrative. In prior years, we had more questions on that form. We've reduced that narrative down to 7 questions. And we did update the project challenges section so that you can provide information regarding how your organization has responded to the COVID-19 situation. You can provide specific details there. We are hoping that that there won't be too many project amendments, but we are taking phone calls. If you think that you do need to change the way you are using your funding, to be used in a different way, you can definitely submit a request for an appointment, and we can talk about the situation. I have already spoken to quite a few of the grantees regarding how you're adjusting. And what I'm hearing for the most part is that it's kind of still unknown, and that a lot of folks are changing their timeline, but maybe not necessarily what they're spending the funds on. So if that is the case, then you would just provide any information about what you kind of are projecting from here till the end of the year in that project challenges section of your report narrative. In addition to that, we've reduced the number of the required attachments in the report. So in the supplemental materials form, you'll see you only have one required attachment there, and you'll see what that is. I'm going to show you all the questions on the application in just a sec. In the expense budget, we haven't made too many changes. What we did was just add a line that says that if you did modify some of the expenses, if you did have to change some of your expenses from how you originally thought you were going to spend them, that's fine. And actually, we're okay with that happening, even if even if the crisis, if it wasn't a crisis, every year we allow you to kind of adjust the way you've spent out the funding. So it's fine if it doesn't match exactly line for line how you originally thought you were going to spend those funds. And definitely we expect that to be the case this year with the pandemic happening. The invoice has not changed, but just a reminder that if you did change information on your part, on your end, if you have changed your address, your main contacts, anything like that, you would definitely want to report that out to us and report that out to the LA County Vendor Services. And we'll talk about the details on how to do that. Okay. So in order to get started, what you want to do is make sure that you've got your OGP contract from 1920 and the adjusted grant budget. Those forms, those documents were sent to you in the fall of 2019 after you received the award. We sent you the contract that was signed by County Council and by our director. That was the final version, the final executed version of your contract, and it would have included a link to your Exhibit B document, which is the terms and instructions for handling the grant, as well as a link to the adjusted grant budget form. So the adjusted grant budget form is basically an explanation of how you were projecting to use the funds back when you were awarded. You would also want to make sure you have a copy of your thank you letter, the thank you letter that you are sending to the Board of Supervisors. That is one of the main requirements in terms of attachments. So if you haven't done that yet, definitely get into your Exhibit B document and start that process, send out that letter before you send us this report, because you do need to attach a copy of that letter to us in the report. So in terms of reporting and invoicing, this is an annual requirement. Each year, the report kind of allows us to hear a little bit more about the process that you have implemented your project, how you're measuring your success. So year one really is focusing on how you've been able to implement and measure project benchmarks. You're going to want to report out on basically the kinds of activities you've completed so far, and you should communicate how you're reflecting on the progress of the project. These reports, all year one and year two reports, are all due on May 15th, 2020. And so we do want to stress that the earlier the better. We do expect that there will be some possible delays in processing of payments. So if you can do that earlier, definitely take advantage of being able to do that now, even if you haven't spent out all of your funds. We know that there will be folks who will be basically on hold. So in your invoice, you're basically invoicing us for funds that possibly may not have been spent out yet, and that's fine. We are allowing you to submit expenses that maybe have been incurred but not spent out by June 30th, 2020. So let's take a look at the contract. This definitely, you're going to want to take a look at this so that you know that you're submitting the correct information in your report forms. The first page of the contract, on the header, it includes your legal name, your DUNS and vendor ID number, and then section 2 has the purpose and scope of the project. It includes the award amount. So these are important aspects of the report. You want to make sure you're actually aligning your report responses to what you stated would be the project, and that you're invoicing us for the correct amount. So here in section 4, where it says maximum grant amount, that's for 2 years. So you would split that in half. If you've already submitted a partial invoice, you would be just submitting an invoice for the balance, whatever is still left in your year one, in the first half of your award. So make sure that you kind of take a look at this and that you've got this vendor ID number. Reminder that the adjusted grant budget table is online, so it's not going to be part of this document. It's going to be online in the Fluid Review system, so download that if you need it. And then if you have changed any of the information on this contract, like I was saying earlier, you're going to need to take that additional step of contacting vendor services. Their database is not the same as our database. We do not share information, so when you make a change, it's got to be reported to both us and them. And there will be a delay if they receive an invoice with an address that does not match what they've got in their records. So if you have any issues with finding your adjusted grant budget, or you're trying to figure out how to report out on these changes, definitely send us an email to grants@arts.lacounty.gov and we'll help you troubleshoot. So let's take a look at this budget. So this is what you filled out at the beginning when you submitted the contract, the agreement. You were asked to fill out this expense budget, and this is basically you telling us how you were thinking you may spend out the funding. You reported out on how you would spend both the award money and the matching source of funds. So look back at this just as a reference to see kind of where you were putting those line items, where you were putting that funding. And just remember that this grant requires a cash match. So for every dollar of the grant, you're going to want to make sure that you've shown a dollar of matching funding. Basically, the idea is that we're demonstrating in the report that we did not provide more than 50% of the final cost of the supported project for that fiscal year. So it's fine if your matching expenses are a lot more than what you received in the award. That's fine. It's just you want to make sure it's not less than what you received in the award. So to begin, to access these report forms, you're going to log into the Fluid Review system. Hopefully you've all been able to get into these forms recently. If you've had any issues with sending into your account, you can definitely email grants@arts.lacounty.gov. There is also a forgot your password button underneath the sign in for your credentials. So if anything, you can also click on that forgot your password button, and Fluid Review tech support will send you a link to reset that password. We know that there are sometimes cases where maybe the person who filled out the forms it may not be with the organization anymore, and maybe there needs to be a transfer of the account to a new contact. That would be another case where you would email us so that we can transfer all of the forms into a different account sign in. So yeah, give us a call or email us so that we can help you through that if that's something that you need to do. So to get started, make sure you've got all of the items from your checklist that we showed you, and then make sure that it's encouraged that you basically cut and paste responses from a Word document rather than typing directly into the Fluid Review forms. Just want to make sure that you've got enough time to do this. So try to target 5 days prior to the deadline to avoid any last minute stress. We have noticed that the Fluid Review system can be glitchy close to deadline time. So we don't want you to have to, face any kind of challenges like that. Try to get it in earlier if you can. And then once you've signed in with all of your information, you can actually go into this dashboard and scroll down to your grants. So here under your grants, you're going to see all of the grants that you've applied for. As you can see on this version, XYZ organization received an award for OGP, and they filled out an application for the Arts Internship Program. So click on the one that says awarded. So the one that says awarded organizational grant program, you're going to click on the application ID, the blue name of your organization, and that will then take you to the list of all the forms. So here's where you're going to see all the forms that you're going to be filling out. You have required forms on this list and you have optional forms. The first 3 are the optional forms. So that is the change of information form, the year 1 partial invoice, the OGP project amendment request. Those are optional. Do not open those if you don't need to submit any of those items. Leave them blank. Do not start them. Go straight to the last 4 documents that you're going to need to fill out for the report, which is the year 1 final report narrative questions, the year 1 report matching expenses, the year 1 supplemental materials, and the year 1 report invoice. To begin, you're clicking start, or you can click on the name of the form in blue. All right. So once you're in, let's say you wanted to, so you can start in any order. Here on my example, we're starting with the matching expenses. And I know this table can be a little confusing. We know it's structured in a funny way. Basically, what you're doing here under this table is showing us how the funds are spent in column 1 are all the line items. Column 2, how the funds are spent, just the OGP specific funds. And then on the 3rd column, year 1 match, that is how so you're telling us how you spent out the matching, the dollar for dollar match. How did you spend that money out? So in the totals, basically those totals, they're being summed, and there's a on the back end, there's a formula that's going to make sure that you cannot submit something that doesn't add up to double the award. And that is to ensure that we did not spend more than 50% on this project. So if you get an error message on that budget on the totals, it's because maybe the expenses do not add up to what they should. There have been cases where there was an error that was caused by a decimal, a comma, or a dollar sign. So do not use any of those symbols. Just put in the numbers, because they do cause errors. So if you run into that and then you get caught up in you just can't, it won't let you do anything and it's frozen, you can either email us at grants@arts, or you can open up a tech support ticket and they can clear it up for you, fix whatever needs to be fixed. So whatever is quicker, that whatever makes sense for you all, but definitely try to not use decimals, dollar signs, or commas to make sure you don't run into that issue. So what you'll see is that in that bottom box where it is doing the validation, it's either it'll say true or false. So if it does meet or exceed the expectations, it'll say true, and if it doesn't, it'll say false. If you have false, it's because the figures aren't correct and you have to rework them and make sure that they add up to the correct amount. Then at that bottom of that page, you'll have boxes that you can provide context for the numbers in. So definitely use this. If you are projecting out numbers, you can provide some context to that. We know right now that, that you may be providing us with a projected set of costs. That's fine. And if you want to give us context on what that means, or if you put in a line item under other, you can explain what that other is as well here on this bottom box. And then you're going to make sure to click save and exit, and click save and exit every single time that you filled something in that you want to make sure you save. The system does not auto save this information. Then you'll go back to the dashboard. And let's say now you want to submit information about your narrative. So these are the 7 project questions, the information that you're going to give us about how, what you've done thus far, how you've adjusted your programming or your timeline or your partnerships to respond to the current situation, So note that these questions have been reduced down to 7. We're hoping that this is enough space for you to provide context and information about your grant. And mostly this is basically just a touching base. We're just touching base with you really about where you're at now. So do your best to explain the progress that you've made, the modifications that you've had to make in terms of temporarily closing doors, adjusting schedules, and reshuffling programming or operations. Focus your responses to the most meaningful elements and information. Make sure you review the character limits. And hopefully if you're working from a Word document, you won't have any challenges with that. Through the responses, we're hoping to gain a deeper understanding of the project scope, the implementation and progress. We also want to know that what modifications you've had to make as a result of the situation. So use this space as best as you can. And the way that we use this information is we will be reviewing these responses and sharing data and trends with the leadership, including our research and evaluation teams. We're using this data to highlight organizational program successes and challenges and general shifts in the nonprofit art sector. We're hoping to be more responsive and to be as best of a partner and supporter as we can be, especially right now. So once you've kind of responded to these 7 questions, if you did say that you need to modify your project for year 2, we will be in contact with you in order to do that. So just, make sure that you say yes on that question if you do need to modify it for next year. You may not know yet, and if that's the case, that's fine. You do still have time. Fiscal year for the second year doesn't start until July 1st, so you may have more information by that time about what you're going to be doing for the second part of your grant. So supplemental materials is the next form that you're going to fill out. Like I was saying, we removed some of the requirements here to make things a little easier. We used to require that you provide proof of recognition, so a copy of a program brochure or website screenshot with our logo on it. You no longer need to do that not for year 1 reporting. You may need to do it for year 2. So for year 1, don't worry about the proof of recognition, and also you don't need to worry about providing images. We in prior years requested images of the programming. You may not have that this year. That's totally fine. You won't be asked for that. What you will be asked for this year, though, is the thank you letter to the Board of Supervisors. The grantees are required to send a letter of thank you to the Board of Supervisors, specifically to the supervisor of their supervisorial district. If you haven't done that, review Exhibit B for the step-by-step instructions and the address where to send that letter. You can create and send that letter now if you haven't done it yet, or definitely prior to submitting the report. So make sure to keep a copy of that, and then you're going to attach it here under Supplemental Materials. And I'm just going to stop here in case there's any questions. I think Laura has been answering some. So if there's anything that hasn't been answered by Laura, I'll take a minute right now to answer.
Hey, Roz. We have a question in the chat box. Folks are wondering where they can find their adjusted budget form.
Okay.
You can kind of explain the difference between that and the budget and project form that's likely from their application.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. The adjusted budget form is a form that you would have filled out back in fall of 2019. That you may not be able to see it listed under your forms on your Manage Your Grant dashboard. However, you do have access to a copy of that. If you are on the dashboard where you see those forms, on the right-hand upper side of the screen where your logo normally is, there is a button right underneath that that says Download Application. When you click there, it'll give you a a zip folder of everything you've ever submitted, including attachments, every form that you've submitted for this application. So your original application and then anything else that you've provided. The adjusted grant budget will be one of the forms within that zip folder that you're going to download. And you may not need to look at that. That really is just in case maybe you've taken over grant writing for your organization and you haven't seen what was submitted originally with the grant agreement. That's when you would use that document. If you already know and you have a good idea of what was submitted in terms of how the funds would be spent, then maybe you don't need to see that adjusted grant budget. But if you do, then that's how you would find it. The difference between that form and the form I was just showing you where you show the actual expenses is basically just that. The adjusted grant budget are projected expenses from when you sign the agreement. Then this budget that you're submitting here with the report are the actual expenses, some of which we know may be incurred expenses. Maybe some of those funds have not been spent out yet, but basically that's the actual. So the original is the projected, and then this one for the report is the actual. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. Anything else, Lara? Anybody else have any other questions?
There weren't any others that came in that needed to be addressed right now. Folks, please, a reminder to you, if you have specific questions, you can send us an email to grants@arts.lacounty.gov, and we can answer any questions of a more general sense here in the chat box. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. All right, so let's move on to the last form in the report, on this report that you're going to need to fill out, which is the money part. It's the invoice. So this is where you're going to basically tell us how much of your funds are still pending us to provide to you. So basically, you're giving us that information through this invoice form. So for some folks, I don't know what percentage of folks are maybe have submitted partial invoices already. We did turn off that partial invoice form. And the reason we did that is we wanted to make sure that we don't have any delays in payments as a result of having two invoices submitted at the same time, a partial and a full invoice for the first year. So we turned off that form. And so now you can only submit a final invoice. This is what that form looks like. Make sure to fill out this invoice in its entirety. If you don't know what your vendor number is, take a look at your contract. You will be able to see it. The vendor number is at the bottom of your header. So you'll see the vendor number there. And so you're gonna, and I believe these forms are actually auto-populated. So we've run into a situation where some folks may have had changes to addresses or vendor numbers or contacts. And when that's the case, that in order for you to update this information on this form, you actually need to go to your user setup. That's it's basically one of the original tasks that you filled out when you created your account on FluidReview. You would go into that user setup, make sure that that's all updated, because the user setup is auto-populating this invoice form. So if you run into the situation where you're seeing the old information, take a minute to go back to that user setup form, update that, then come back into this one, and you'll see the updated information. And then definitely save and exit. And if you're wondering, if you're not quite sure what your invoice should be, maybe you submitted a partial invoice earlier in the year and you couldn't remember what that amount was, definitely send us an email because we can help you figure out what that number should be. If we do receive an invoice where the invoice number, the amount is incorrect, it will cause a delay. So we want to make sure that it doesn't, that we don't receive an invoice with an incorrect amount, because we don't want it to delay the process of the payment. So please make sure you email us if you're not actually sure what that amount should be. I do see a question on the screen. If we did get a partial payment earlier than presume that this invoice amount is just for the difference. That's correct. You will be invoicing for the balance, whatever's left. Are any of the metrics needed for this round, metrics, demographics of audiences and artists? No, we are not asking for that information until the year 2 report. Okay. So that's pretty much it. This is actually going to be, I think, a quick task for you to complete. Hopefully make this a lot easier this year than it may have been in years prior. And you should know that us at the Department of Arts and Culture grants staff, we are looking at all of our forms, all of our processes, reviewing them and reassessing what we actually are asking from grantees. We want to make sure that we are as flexible as possible, and that we do this every year, but I think in particular this year, we're really reassessing how we are asking folks to submit things, and want to make sure we're not making you jump through too many hoops. We know this is a very challenging year, and we want to be as responsive as possible. And always, please feel free to send feedback to us. We are definitely open to hearing anything that you want to share with us about these processes. We're hoping that this will be an easier year in terms of grant reporting. So you've completed all the forms. You're going to submit everything, and you won't have submitted everything until you click that green button. So please make sure you click that. I'm going to reiterate, make sure you click that year 1 report button. That button is basically what triggers us and helps us to know that you've completed everything and that we can go in and export it and process the payment. So make sure you do that after you've completed all the forms. And then just a quick heads up that we do every year have an audit of grant reports. So what this will mean is basically we may come back to you for proof of expenses. In prior years, we used to automatically ask for proof of expenses with your report. You had to submit copies of accounting statements or bank statements, receipts, things like that. But we got rid of that 2 or 3 years ago. However, we still do an audit. So make sure that you keep these records somewhere so that you can easily access them in the case that we come back to you and ask for them.
As I have a question from someone in the chat box. It's a question about given the shifts in projects and programming, what if expenses have been incurred for projects that are no longer going to happen because of COVID-19? How should organizations be responding to this, both in their budget expenses, their invoice amount, and in their narrative responses? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we do want to hear what's happened. So definitely be transparent, be honest. If you've incurred expenses and you're paying those out, even though the show or the services are no longer going to happen, tell us about that. Tell us about how you've responded. If you've maybe had to apply for a loan, or you've taken some steps to figure out what that's going to mean for your financial situation, definitely feel free to explain that to us. We are basically going to pay you out regardless of whether or not you were able to complete that service or that program. We know that this is a difficult situation, and if things were canceled, expenses were still incurred. So it would not be fair for us to say, well, then, you didn't finish, so you don't get the funds. We will still pay you out. And we just, want to hear a little bit in the report about what the situation was and how you've responded. And definitely, if you have any information about year 2, you can submit a little bit of that, but we know it might still be a question mark at this point. And yeah, so I think if there's anything else, any other general questions, we can talk about them now. If not, if you would actually rather check in with me one-on-one, we do have, like I was saying, appointment times, and we will share the PowerPoint link and the appointment link as well. I've created a Calendly web page so that you can find a time to connect with me if you need to do that. So I'm just going to wait here on the line if there's any other questions. Otherwise, the webinar is done. Thank you so much, everyone. And we are all wishing you the best with this new coming year. We're hoping that everyone is staying safe and well and adjusting okay to the current events. Thank you very much.